Her hair went white in a single night, while she was still alive to feel it. She was 37 years old, locked in a stone cell, waiting for strangers to decide whether she would live or die. And somewhere in that dark, without a wound, without a single blow, the color drained out of her hair. Doctors called it shock. Later they would name the condition after her, Marie Antoinette syndrome. But the truth underneath it is simpler, and worse. An entire nation had decided to hate one woman. And the body knows when it is being hunted. This is the story of how the most adored woman in Europe became the most despised human being alive. And what it quietly reveals about all of us, about why a frightened crowd always needs one face to destroy. She arrived in France at 14. An Austrian archduchess, handed across the border like a treaty wearing a dress. They stripped her of her clothes at the frontier, every thread, even her shoes, so she would carry nothing of Austria into France. She stepped naked into a tent and came out French. A child, told to smile. She barely spoke the language. She was married at 15 to a shy, awkward boy who would one day be king, a husband who ignored her for years. She was a lonely teenager in the most watched court on earth, and she did what lonely teenagers do. She looked for joy wherever she could buy it. And France adored her. She was blonde, graceful, luminous. Crowds pressed against the palace gates just to watch her pass. When she entered Paris, thousands wept with joy. She was not a queen yet, she was a promise. The future. Everything glittering and young. Nobody warned her what adoration is. Adoration is alone. And crowds always come to collect. For a while she paid nothing back and lived like it. Versailles was a machine built to consume money, and she fed it beautifully. Gowns. Diamonds. A private retreat where she played at being a shepherdess while real peasants starved a few miles away. They gave her a nickname, Madame Deficit. The woman of debt. Every empty stomach in France now had a name to blame, and it was hers. And then came the necklace. A con artist forged the queen's signature to buy the most expensive diamond necklace in the world, a river of jewels worth a fortune, in Marie Antoinette's name. She never ordered it. She never touched it. She was entirely innocent. It didn't matter. By the time the scandal broke, France had already decided who she was, and the story fit the monster they had built. The public didn't ask if it was true. They asked how well it confirmed what they already believed. That is the trap of becoming a symbol. Even the lies people tell about you start to feel like evidence. Here is the thing the paintings never show. She was not running the country. She could not raise a tax or sign a law. The debt-crushing France was decades old, wars, a bankrupt treasury, a system rotting from the top. But a system is invisible. You cannot picture a treasury. You cannot hang a war on the wall and scream at it. You can picture a woman. That is the turn. That is the moment a person stops being a person and becomes a symbol. And once you are a symbol, nothing you actually do matters anymore. The pamphlets came, filthy, invented, obscene. Cartoons of her as a snake, a spendthrift, a monster. None of it was true. All of it was believed. Because the crowd did not need the truth. It needed a target it could see. Then the world cracked open. In 1789 the people stormed the Bastille, and the revolution began. The royal family was dragged from Versailles to Paris and put on display like an exhibit. By 1791 they understood they were prisoners in all but name, and they ran. In the dead of night they slipped out of the city in a heavy carriage, disguised as servants, racing for the border and safety. They almost made it. But the king's face was on the money in every pocket in France, and at a town called Varennes someone recognized him. They were dragged back to Paris in dead, furious silence. The escape was the final proof the people wanted, that the royals were traitors who would abandon France the moment they could. After that, there was no mercy left to give. Soon the monarchy fell entirely, and she was locked in a cold tower. Guards watched her every hour, even as she dressed, even as she slept. They read her letters. They listened at the door. A woman who had once owned a palace with 1,000 rooms now lived in 3, watched like an animal in a pen. And still the pamphlets came, because a caged symbol is even more useful than a free one. Now they could point and say, "Look how low the monster has fallen." They took her freedom. Then her husband, the king, marched to his own guillotine, his head held up to a roaring crowd. And then they took the last thing she had. They took her son. He was 8 years old. They pulled him out of her arms in the middle of the night and gave him to a cobbler to be re-educated, to be taught to hate his own mother. Through the wall of her cell she could sometimes hear him. They coached the boy until he signed a paper accusing her of monstrous things. A child, made into a weapon against the woman who bore him. She was not allowed to hold him. She was not allowed to say goodbye. This is what a mob does that a single enemy never could. It does not just want you dead. It wants you emptied first. By the time they put her on trial, she was a ghost of the golden girl who once wept for joy in Paris. Thin. Bleeding. Her hair gone white at 37. They accused her of everything: treason, bankrupting France, and finally, unbelievably, of abusing her own child. The charge was so vile that even that revolutionary courtroom fell silent when she answered it. She stood and spoke to the mothers in the room. "If I have not answered," she said, "it is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge against a mother." And for one moment, the crowd that had hunted her wavered. The women in the gallery murmured for her. Because for a single breath she was not a symbol. She was a mother. She was a person again. It didn't matter. The verdict was written before the trial began. Guilty. Death within hours. They cut her white hair off in the cell, shearing it to bare her neck for the blade. They tied her hands behind her back, something they had not even done to the king. And they put her not in a carriage but in an open cart, so the whole city could watch her hauled through the streets. The ride took over an hour. People lined the road to scream at her. She looked at none of them. She sat straight, her eyes fixed somewhere far away, already gone. At the scaffold she climbed the steps quickly. And there, at the very end, she did the smallest human thing. She stepped on the executioner's foot by accident. And she apologized. "Pardon me, sir," she said. "I did not mean to do it." Her last words on earth were an apology to the man about to kill her. Then the blade came down, and the crowd that had spent a decade building her into a monster held up her head and cheered at a woman who, in the end, had only been afraid. So why does this keep happening? Why does every frightened society, in every century, reach for a single face to destroy? Because pain needs an address. When a whole nation is starving and terrified, the real cause is almost always too big and too diffuse to punish: a broken economy, a dying system, 1,000 quiet decisions no one can see. That kind of truth is unbearable, because it means no one is coming to save you. So the mind does what the mind always does. It shrinks the monster down to something with a face. A name. A woman in a diamond necklace. Psychologists call it scapegoating, and it is one of the oldest reflexes we have. It is written into our oldest stories: the tribe that heaps its sins onto a single goat and drives it into the desert, so everyone left behind can go home feeling clean. Load every fear onto one body, cast that body out, and for a moment the group feels unified. Powerful. The hatred feels like justice. It even feels like love for each other, purchased with someone else's blood. Marie Antoinette was not innocent of vanity. She spent while others starved. But she did not cause the hunger, and she could not have cured it. She was killed for what she represented, not for what she did. And the people who killed her did not feel like murderers. They felt like heroes. That is the part that should frighten you. And notice how good it feels. That is the dangerous part. Scapegoating is never experienced as cruelty from the inside. It is experienced as clarity. As relief. For years the French had felt powerless against forces they could not name, and then, suddenly, there was a face, and a cart, and a blade, and the illusion that if they just removed this one woman, the pain would end. It didn't. She died, and France was still starving. The revolution went on to devour thousands more, and then began devouring the revolutionaries themselves. The monster was never the problem. But killing it felt like a solution, and that feeling is the most seductive lie a frightened crowd can tell itself. So here is the question I'll leave you with. The next time a crowd agrees, all at once, that one person is the reason for everything wrong, the next time the hatred feels clean and shared and certain, ask yourself one thing. Are you looking at a monster? Or just at the face they chose, because the truth was too big to fight? Follow for more.